editors. There are editors who are basically supposed to go through it. I say basically are supposed, because so far the editors have been rather, and I'm one of them, have been rather deficient in. We haven't really done our job. We lax. Okay, thank you. In our responsibilities, I'm delighted to say that already in the database, at least waiting for publication or waiting to be looked at, there are over 400 entries already. I think perhaps even more, which shows just how lax we've been. And hopefully that will change after the conference. But again, so it's just to tell you that if you do put in materials, and I hope you will start putting in materials after the conference, you'll see the materials will be published. But the idea is just to have some sort of filter to make sure that, or to find preliminary mistakes, and there can be discussions between the editors and the people who have put in the entries to clarify and clear up things. As I'm sure you will see today, an enormous amount of problems arise from how to spell names, right, and how to put them in, questions of dates, texts. There are lots of things, and I hope this will all arise in the workshops today. So we have 4 different sessions. We have 4 sessions. The idea is it's not just lecture, and it's not just the presenters talking, but it's to raise questions, have a dialogue. I'm going to be taking copious notes, right, of all the technical and other issues that need to be, and I hope all the other editors sitting around here, Rami, Effie, and Dov, right, will be taking notes as well, so that we can afterwards work out what we're going to do with all the issues that arise here. And I also just want to say that the way you'll see the database now is not the way that you eventually, when the database will look for those who are accessing it from outside. And what we're seeing now is the internal part of the database. We haven't yet got to the stage of designing how the web page is going to look to open access, right? For people who come and want to use the database for research. Okay, and that's the next stage that will happen after the conference. So without any further ado, Yaniv will take us through, I think, the general structures, and we'll begin our discussion.
So, thank you, Professor Haynes. What we thought about doing and what we're going to do today is we're going to present 6 cases of conversion, 3 from my own work and 3 from Paola's, and we're going to show how to access these cases using different search categories. Now, the story of each person's conversion is complicated and unique, and every one of these converts has different co-stars in their stories and different ways of accessing the information, be it through manuscript or through bibliography. And we also don't assume that the persons who will go and search for these people will automatically search the same way. So what the database tries to do is to provide a very large and comprehensive amount of information so that every person can search through the things that they know about and through the things that they are looking for. And another strength of this database, and which we will hope will grow in this respect, is that there are people who are connected to more than one case. And so optimistically, of course, you would be able to have one person link you to other cases of conversion. So what we're going to do is start off with one case, and then we'll hopefully show how it might work. So the first case that I want to talk to you about is also the easiest, is when we're searching for an individual, for a name. And the name that I've chosen is a person from my own research, is Sigismund. Sigismund was a Burgundian prince who lived in the late 5th and early 6th century in the Burgundian kingdom, and we don't really know when he was born. We assume that he was born sometime in the 480s, and this is because he led an army into battle in 507, so he should have been old enough to do that, meaning that the latest he could have been born was in the 480s. Sometime between 502 and 515, Sigismund decided to convert from Arianism, which was his father's religion, but not necessarily his mother's, we simply don't know, to Catholicism. And he did this somewhere between 502 and 515. We don't really know exactly when, but we know that in 515, in a fit of rage, Sigismund strangled his eldest son, Sigistrix, and as an act of remorse, he then later established a monastery called Saint Maurice d'Agon. And this monastery is important in many ways, but it also points to the terminus antiquum of his conversion date. So what I want to show you now is, supposing all we know is the name of the convert, how we might go about searching for him. And now the first division that we have is between individual converts and mass conversions. So obviously this is one person, so we're going to search for him through individual conversion. So we'll go ahead and go to categories, and from there we go to person. So he's obviously already on there. And there he is. Okay, I hope you can see him. He's a little low down. So this is Sigismund, Prince of Burgundy. We also have a putative date of 524. That's the date that he was killed. Also, I forgot to mention that when he was killed, he was interred in the monastery that he established, which became the first royal cult site in the West. So now we're going to go into entries and see exactly what the entry looks like from within. I'm going to scroll up a bit so you can see. Now this is already a published value, so a published entry, so that means that it's available to everyone who will eventually access the database. But this is one entry that went through the editorial process already. Okay, so the title of the entry is Sigismund, Prince of Burgundy, who died in 524, and his conversion date is somewhere between 502 and 515. We don't really know his age, so I just put in 20. And it also has a number of rubrics which allow for free text. So obviously motives, which was the alliance with the Gallo-Roman elites, or trends within the Gibichung family, that's the royal family of Burgundy, possibly alliance with the Byzantines, reaction to the conversions, also abstractive entry, and connection with other converts. Now, Sigismund's cousin was Clotilde, whom you may know was the wife of Clovis I, who was the first Frankish king to convert to Catholicism. So she can act as a connecting link between the two cases. And obviously, if I'm interested in Sigismund, I might find Clotilde and have her lead me to the other conversion case and have some sort of context. So I'm just going to let you see all the various categories that the entry has. Connections with other converts, dates of conversion, place of conversion, conversion from, conversion to. Also, a nice feature that the database has is that it allows you to embed all sorts of media. And what we've decided to do on this case is to have this piece of visual evidence, which is an exhibition that was held in 2006 in the Louvre in Paris, which features all the various relics and treasures from the monastery of Saint Maurice d'Agon. And it's really a very, it's a very useful feature because it allows you to display all the visual evidence. In this case, it's just a video, but as you can imagine, you can also film yourself speaking about the convert. You can also have all types of art, all types of JPEGs and PDFs and what have you. So obviously, if you want to see the artifacts that are related to this particular convert, that's a very useful way to do that. Okay, so another person of interest is Avitus of Vienne, who was the prelate of Burgundy, who really sponsored Sigismund's conversion. And he also features pretty heavily in another conversion case that I will talk about later. But I think now I'll turn it over to you and you can talk about it. Yes.
So the three cases I'm going to speak briefly about have to do with conversion from Judaism to Christianity in the 14th century crown of Aragon. And the first convert I'm going to mention is an individual called Pere, who, that's in Catalan or Aragonese, but in Latin Petrus, in English Peter, in Spanish Pedro, so this raises the question, right, of how do we spell the name, what language do we enter it in, also what do we do with the converted name versus his name prior to conversion, do we know both, which do we search by, things to think about. So in any case, Pere is a fascinating but mysterious individual because we don't know much about him before his conversion, we don't know how old he is. So at the time of his conversion, he was born in Aragon, and in January 1340, he trekked all the way over to Catalonia to a small village where he was baptized. He stays there for a few weeks. He walks all the way back. On the way home, he starts to lodge with Jews, interestingly, and when he gets back very close to his hometown, he, instead of starting to pick up a new life as a Christian, goes to the home of the Justice of Calatayud in Aragon, denounces Christianity, says he wants to die as a Jew, and is sent to the stake as an apostate, as a Christian apostate. And he's about to be burned at the stake when somebody rushes onto the scene, he's taken down, they interrogate him, and he blames a group of Jews for having convinced him to die as a Jewish martyr and renounce his conversion to Christianity. So one of the Jews who is accused and actually burned at the stake for having allegedly convinced Pere to return to Judaism and die as a martyr is a man named Joseph Catorce, and he's condemned to death because he is said to be a repeat offender and to have already been involved in the rejudaization of converts. So let's say one wanted to look up Pere, but one couldn't remember his name, or one was not spelling it correctly or didn't know how to spell it, but you remember that this Catorce fellow was a crucial figure in his case. You could, for example, under categories, go to person and date, for example, and enter Catorce, as Yaniv has done. And then we find that there is one case in which he's mentioned so far, so then we could click on entries or details, and that would bring us to our friend Pere, who I was just describing to you. And here's the entry that I made. I didn't guess an age for him. It was interesting to me that you guessed an age for Sigismund, so I didn't fill that in. Motives, I have no idea. Reactions to the conversion, well, there are Jewish and Christian reactions to the conversion, which some are alleged, some are for sure. So it might be interesting to think about maybe separating out the rubrics for reactions to conversions on the part of the community that was left behind versus the community that was entered. Backsliding, absolutely, very dramatically. And connections with other converts, somebody I haven't entered yet, whom we know only by his Jewish name, Abadia, who actually burned at the stake in 1334, allegedly at the instigation of Jews as well. Family ties, we know that Pere's father was Isaac Camariel, although we don't know anything about who that actually was. And we have the names of his two godparents in Catalonia, and we have actually a little bit of information about them. And then if we scroll down a little bit more, the languages in which the trial records are written, a mixture of Catalan and Latin. Most of the testimonies in the inquisitorial dossier are in Catalan. The primary source and some secondary sources about the case, the places the case relates to before and after conversion. And as a visual, I just entered two images. One is just the cover of the codex that contains the proceedings, wherein we learn about this story. It's showing up very large. I'm not sure quite how to manipulate the image. And then the second image that I entered is the first folio of the codex to show you the condition of the materials with which one has to work and it's vertical. We're not sure how to manipulate it and to rotate it, but if you want to actually read it, you can just drag it onto your desktop, and there it shows up vertically, so it's not a problem if you're actually interested in deciphering it. So that's the first case I wanted to share.
Is this open for discussion throughout? Is this open for discussion throughout?
Yes, of course. We don't have to wait for the end.
Yeah.
Whatever questions that you have.
something that comes to mind in that case that you presented, Paola. So, on the one hand, the Christians accused the Jews for instigating the conversion of the backsliding of this Petrus.
Yes.
We don't know for certain if that was actually the case, right?
That's true.
And this could be actually a cover story. It could be a way for this person out of the fire.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a variety of reasons, but it's not reflected through the entry. If someone accessing this entry.
Well, I wrote allegedly.
What?
I wrote allegedly.
Yeah. Yeah, but
I feel.
This is more of a technical remark. It's not actually for what you put in, but I'm just thinking for people who are accessing this database from outside, I'm wondering whether we can open up the possibility for them, for people moving from one religion to another, as far as motivation is concerned, whether we should take the cover story at face value or leave motivation blank because we don't know if there was a real backsliding.
Or maybe have an entry for evidence regarding motivation, and there you just describe the evidence as opposed to interpreting it.
In a way, that's something actually more abstract. It's really the place where the person who's putting in the material can make up his mind how much he or she wants to put in about what we were just talking about. So again, this is a very. It is a problem. The abstract is a free text, and you can put in as much.
So maybe one way of dealing with that is by increasing the number of rows that we have in the leftmost column. And then that kind of forces the user to put something in one or another row, and then within that row it's free. That is to say, I might have something that's not exactly motives, but as we've said, it's not entirely clear what conversion is, so maybe something about the nature of the conversion. Was it forced? And maybe that fits under. Do we see? Sorry, do we see that?
There's a little tick. There's a box to tick.
I mean, do you think that ticking a box is? Yeah. Do you think ticking a box is enough? Something like nature of conversion, right?
What is voluntary? There's such a range of voluntary.
Right. As we saw concerning the Persian kings, right? Some folks converted to take on some kind of royal position, right? Is that forced? So I think that could be expanded, and if you expand it a little bit, then within those various rows you have more options for free text. And so what might be fruitful is for us to discuss what exactly goes into that leftmost column there that maybe isn't there now.
If we could pick the categories, you think should be there.
Yeah, I might split forced conversion, like sort
Maybe
of something about the nature of the conversion.
Circumstances of conversion, and then have a box where you can describe.
Yeah, and again, that I think gets to the core at what exactly conversion is. Circumstances of conversion, nature of conversion, something like that. Yeah.
Just before the questions, I think that you'll discover that whenever you kind of delve into one of these categories and you get into closer resolution, each and every one of them poses a string of methodological questions that really, you start to question what you're talking about. And yes, so the structure of the database is a database, and in that sense it is limited to portray all the shades of conversion. So I think one initial solution for this that we're thinking about is that once these once these entries go live, there will be a discussion page. And that's really where all the magic happens. I mean, this is where the people who look at the entry can discuss things with each other and embed links, and this can be a whole portal into the convert that is not really visible on this page right now.
Just along those lines, it might be helpful, I was thinking, to add a place to say who authored each entry so that if somebody has specific questions, they can get in touch with the person who entered the information directly.
That should be there now, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Are we moderating then?
Yes.
Okay.
I think this is amazing and like a really powerful tool. One thought I have is to invert the entries so that the more editorial style entries are at the bottom, and at the top you find the things that give the researcher to the more primary data, what is primary. But I think, for example, bibliography and like the sources of this, I see why you put it at the bottom, that's traditional, but moving that to the top, like things that people can use to identify whether or not they want to do this in their study, the dates, the names, the places. I think that information should be front-loaded, and then the editorial information should be at the bottom, or even put entirely in this other things you're talking about, because to me it sounds like almost the editorial stuff should go on like a wiki, or where that can be segmented from the data that a researcher would want to use to be able to reproduce results. So what do you need to reproduce results? The images, the bibliography, and then the identifier. Yes?
Yeah, I want to add to that my own experience to learn, so to speak, from my errors. When I made a database of all the notarial records from the Roman Ghetto, and I have 6,000 entries in there, the most important thing turned out to be not the specific information, but the categories that I set up ahead at the top. Because when you want to search the database, you don't want to have to go through each entry. You want to be able to say converts Spain, you want to say converts rich, converts poor. And you need a category which is subcategories, and that way you put that in, and if you have 10,000 entries in there, it's going to pull up the 200 things. Also, when you're putting in the dates, this for some reason or other we did right. You don't put December 20th, 1242. You put 1242, 1220, because that way when you search by dates, you get all the dates together. It's very, very easy to follow by dates. And I'm sure there are people who are far better and far more professional, or let's just say who know what they're doing than me.
The dates is something that I think could be discussed as well, because right now if you want to search by century or by half century, I'm not sure how to do that. Maybe it will become clear. But right now, dates are being entered in very different ways by different researchers, and many of them are incredibly specific, and most people wouldn't know which specific date they want to look for.
Yes, so I think our most pressing task at this point of the work is to circulate a style sheet, which will define how names are entered and how dates are entered, but just as an improvised technical solution, you can't enter a range of dates. So you can say something like circa 605 to 615. You can't do that. But that really depends on whether the person who will come looking will know that that's what you did. So I think once we have a style sheet in place, and it will be available for everyone on the website to know how to search, then things will be a lot clearer.
Can I just say something about the search? That is important. So far, at the moment, all we have is just the most basic search. In fact, one of the purposes of this workshop is to also come up with search strategies. In other words, we want to develop the advanced search, which of course we hope will be that you'll be able to ask very many different questions, like as Ken said before, like be able to ask and come up with the materials that you're searching for. We're not yet there, because you also need a bulk of material to be able to start asking these questions. So at the moment the search is very basic. That's not the way it's going to stay.
What can you do now?
At the moment you search a word and you can find, if the word appears in the database, that's what you'll find. Okay, so at the moment we haven't got, we haven't yet got to the stage where we're asking, we can ask questions in the database like, rich converts in Spain in I'm just in the 13th century, and it'll give you a list, but that's what we're hoping to get to.
Would it be possible? Sorry. Go ahead.
How much is index? How much is just an algorithm? Like an index would be like a fixed category, and an algorithm would be
At the moment it's being index. But the advanced set will be as
In terms of the dates, just whether there could be general categories for dates, because people are going to search usually with a century in mind or a half century in mind, I'm thinking, a way so that if somebody enters a specific date, like 1206, the database could nevertheless categorize that in a way as 13th century, so that that 1206 entry would show up when someone searches by 13th century. Yeah, Yaniv?
I wonder if one way to bypass the methodological or philosophical question about what conversion is, whether or not it was forced, and all this, the status of the sources, is to structure it not according to converts, but according to sources. That is to say, reports, accounts on conversion, and then you can have also, I don't know now how different manuscripts, for example, or different accounts of the same converts are taken into consideration, but organizing, structuring it according to different accounts of conversion, of things pertaining to conversion, is one way also to bypass part of these essential problems. What conversion is.
Okay, thank you for that. For two reasons. One is because that's also a solution that we were aware of, and I think we're gradually shifting to that notion of searching through the source instead of through the person. And the other reason is because you set me up perfectly for the second entry, which I'd like to show now. So the second case that I want to talk to you about is connected to the first, and it is the mass conversion of the 3,000 Franks following Clovis's baptism, which you know is a very famous story. Now, what we know about these 3,000 men, obviously with all the caveats in using such a number, is that it is intimately connected to the conversion of the monarch himself. And so the question is when to date the baptism of Clovis, obviously. So Clovis came to power in the very early 480s, and he had two decisive wars, one in 496 against the Alamans and one in 507 against the Visigoths. And his conversion can be connected very persuasively to each of these two events. So when we want to know how to treat those 3,000 converts, we have to know how to date the baptism of Clovis. And one of the links into deciding, not that it's a finalized and decided issue, it's just that one of the clues into figuring out how to date the baptism is a letter written by Abbess of Vienne, whom I mentioned previously, who congratulates Clovis. And this one letter survives in one copy of a 12th century manuscript, which is now in Lyon. It's Lyon Bibliothèque Municipale 618-535. And assuming that we would like to find the person using the source, then we would go about searching for him through manuscript. Now, I've termed the source itself Epistula 46 because that's how it's known in professional literature, but obviously we're going to have to accommodate people who try to search for it as Lyon Bibliothèque Municipale or any other style, so that obviously factors again into that requirement for a style sheet. But once we do, here it is, Abbess of Vienne, Epistula 46. And it also links, obviously, to the entry itself, which is the Franks. Okay, so in terms of the structure of the entry, it's very similar to what we've seen before.
I didn't know whether to click the box forced conversion. Huh?
Well, it was an offer that they could not refuse. Yes. They say Clovis was very worried about how they would react, but when he came over and tried to convince them to embrace Catholicism, he finds out that they've already done it for him, they were already persuaded by the time he got to them. So, I don't know, nefarious forces at work, you decide.
You click the button.
So, I mean, if you want to see the manuscript, here it is. I mean, it's not Merovingian Chancery script, which is a shame, but nevertheless, it's the only. So you can see Avitus Episcopus, where the capital, nice red capital A is. And there's a whole host of relics and other material things that are connected to the baptism, such as the holy ampulla, which we know when Clovis was baptized, a dove came from the sky bearing an ampulla with sacred oil, and so here it is, or at least a sketch of it. It was destroyed.
What about the oil?
But I mean, as you can see, and here is the baptism itself in Carolingian ivory. So basically, what the manuscript does is it allows you to just stock it with visual imagery, which is in many respects very helpful. Of course, if I wanted to search through Clotilde, Queen of the Franks, who was also the cousin of Sigismund from the previous entry, I could do that because she's entered as a family tie of both men. So that's
Just click on her name?
well.
That would be a good feature.
Yeah. We should be able to when we're accessing it externally. This is from the inside, so I can't really do that now. But if we wanted to go out and search through her, then that would be possible. Okay. Well, not now anyway. But you want me to go? Okay. So you want to do yours?
So the next convert I wanted to mention is also from the 14th century crown of Aragon, and she's a woman who took the Christian name Eulalia. She was a married Jewish woman who around the year 1380 decided she really wanted to marry a different husband, and this individual was originally Jewish as well, but he converted along with her. And to her dismay, I imagine, here I'm speculating, instead of receiving a divorce from her Jewish husband after her conversion, she instead learned that her first husband, who was a tailor named Astruk, decided he too would convert. So now she had two Jewish convert husbands, one whom she had married when she and the first husband were both Jewish, and one with whom she had contracted a Christian marriage. So this case we were going to search by bibliography, right? So let's say that you knew that somebody had written an article about Eulalia. You couldn't remember her name, but it was in an article by somebody. So I've written an article that features her, so one could search under bibliography and then last name of author, for example. So one could enter Tartakoff, and it's the article number 57 on Jewish women and apostasy. So one would click on details or entries. We learn as we go. And Eulalia, I'm sorry?
The important thing is the journal in which it appears.
Okay, yes. And Eulalia would pop up there as the third entry, and then you could click on details to learn more about her. Right, and all of these women are in the article as well, so you would, depending on what you were looking for, you maybe even learn more than that. So I'm just checking if there's anything new to point out here. There are connections with other converts whom I could enter into the database, and hopefully people could click on to establish her network, her social network a little bit better. And in this case, the visual evidence that I entered is the actual document in its entirety. So a researcher could have the entire primary source available to them. Oops. And read it and interpret it on their own without ever having to travel to Barcelona and sit in the archive there. Yes, Chaim. Yes.
That document now be entered as a text.
Absolutely.
And not just as a, in other words, we have the millennia.
Right.
We have the document itself is in fact the text, which talks about conversion, therefore perhaps should also be entered separately as a manuscript or as a text.
Oh, yeah.
So right now I have it cited below where it says primary sources, right? I say Barcelona, Spain, Diocesan Archive of Barcelona, Registra Communium 42, folio 177V, which was difficult to enter in a way. I had to enter it all as one thing. For example, right now there's not a way to search by Diocesan Archive of Barcelona. What are all the entries pertaining to that? But I imagine that will come with time. But you're suggesting this whole entry becoming a value of its own?
No, the text.
Primary source should be able to click on it and go to an entry of text. Now, whether the server entered the entry is not a question, right? Potentially it will serve as a text, right?
So that manuscript should in fact serve as a text itself, which can be clickable, and then if someone's put in the entry, you'll find out details of what else is in it. What else might be in that.
That would show up on any search setting Barcelona, where you get anyone from Barcelona, a text from Barcelona.
Right, and if I were to make that the entry, then there's the bishop's name and the signatories, all kinds of other information to highlight. So I think that's all we were going to show here.
So another possible yeah.
No, I was just, no, go ahead. I thought we were going back to questions. I had more general
we can.
Well, then the more general big question would be, as we've been talking, the examples you've given and the examples we've looked at over the last few days, obviously they're very different kinds of sources we're using, and the conclusions one draws from a deposition in front of the Inquisition, or an autobiographical narrative, say by Petros Alfonsi in a polemics, or say a hagiographical text in which a saint converts Muslims or Jews to Christianity. Obviously those are all going to become entries, but for someone who's then trying to use these together to try to make sort of conclusions about, statistical conclusions about conversion or so forth, it could be very dangerous to do that if you're not thinking about the very different nature of these sources and of these converts, some of whom may have never existed, some of whom are very clearly documented. So is there any sort of general thought about how to deal with this problem of the diversity, which is obviously going to be part of the richness of this, but also causes some potential methodological problems?
Short answer or long answer? This is something we talked about quite a lot over the year, and again, this goes back to the idea of within text, for example, we want to have categories within the text, which will allow you to say that the text contains it's a literary source, legal source, polemical, theological, whatever, right, which will also basically give you your first entry into the text, and the text contains, and will allow you, hopefully we're hoping that researchers will be able to be crystal enough to, you're right, it's right.
Possibly there could be an entry for genre, which would at least highlight, there is? But before we searched for hagiography and we couldn't, let's see.
Well, it exists within the...
I didn't see an entry place for genre.
I don't see anything up there.
Okay, no, if you wanted to hear it.
When you describe the motives of conversion, for example, we know that there are certain types of defeat, but you also categories, so like a dream or so then if someone wants to know all the cases where someone dream about Jesus or dream about someone, so in the motives it should be also categories for
or miracle, conversion miracle.
Again, there are a lot of categories that you can add. You're adding new categories as you go. So, for example, if you want to put in miracles, miracle stories, you can put in as a category miracles. Every time someone else comes and puts in a miracle category, that category will already exist, and so it will be
So actually what I did is enter a hagiography, one specific hagiography, and once you enter a manuscript or a primary source, it asks you for the type of genre, and then you can do that. I don't think we can search by hagiography, but we can certainly have a list of all the primary sources and look for hagiography, and hopefully in the future that will also happen. So actually that's also a good setup for the next one. This is a hagiography composed between 639 and 643 by a monk called Jonas of Bobbio, who composed a life of Columbanus, who was a monk that came to the continent in the early 590s. And Columbanus was very closely affiliated to the Merovingian house, but after a few years, the relationship between him and his patrons broke down, and he was forced to flee. And in the interlude between his Gallic sojourn and his Lombard period, he tried his hand at mission in the region of Lake Constance. And what happens there was that the monks came to the lake and built a very small rudimentary monastery, and then one day when they were working in the field, they stumbled upon a procession of pagans who were making a beer offering to the pagan god Wodan. Now Columbanus was of course horrified by this, and then he proceeded to perform a miracle whereby he breathed on the cask of beer and it shattered. And of course the rustic Alamans were very impressed by this miracle and decided to convert to Catholicism. The accomplishment was short-lived because the monks were making a nuisance of themselves in the region, and after two of them were killed by the locals, they were kicked out and they went on to Italy. And another interesting thing about this story is that we know that the author of the story also has another exploding beer miracle in another hagiography that he's written, which is the Vita Vedastis. So what I've done is I've entered the two hagiographies as connected, so that if you're looking for exploding beer miracles, as just one option obviously, then you would be able to find both stories through this entry. But if we want to go into this entry in a different way, I mean, one possible way is to search for people converting from paganism. Now, I think now would be a good time to refine what we mean by paganism, because we treat paganism as though it were any other religion, and obviously we know that that's not the case. So we're going to have some sort of category for pre-Muslim Arabian paganism, or Germanic paganism, or Slavic paganism, and all the classical paganism, and all the wonderful sorts of paganisms that we have. But just as an introduction into this problem, we can search for religion, and right now we have an index of religions, of which Germanic paganism is one. And then this is the one source that we have, and the entries within it are the Franks who converted from Germanic paganism, which I spoke about earlier, and this case of Alemannian pagans in about 610 in Brigance, who converted from Germanic paganism to Nicene Catholicism. And here we see all the details. Obviously we don't have a number, several dozen, and all the backlash that happened later with the hostility in the local duke. And in the primary sources, you can see that Jonas of Bobbio, possibly because it's doubtful whether he actually wrote it, also appears with the Vita Vedastis, which is the other exploding beer hagiography. And also, of course, a list of secondary literature. Okay, so Asia, if you want to...
I can make Germanic Slavic etc. The question is a rather long thing. You can only enter what you convert from and what you convert to. However, especially in case of serial converters as well as mass conversions, we should consider alternate, or at least adding the option of having. Yeah.
There's also different views on where someone is advocating, where some people say they converted actually to Judaism, and the other people say something else. So who says what? And that case it works. There's some different versions of the same event.
I think this is a problem that to some degree is solved by shifting the focus from convert to source, like you suggested, because then the source pretty much speaks for itself, and we can at least have in the database what the source says and not what the people say, because you can't trust people.
Well, then the source can say, we say this, you say this.
Exactly. We'll move it to the last one.
So the last case we wanted to share with you this morning is a dramatic one that we learn about from a letter that the Bishop of Eln wrote to the Bishop of Barcelona. And according to the Bishop of Elna, there was a Jewish woman named Blanca who was in labor for 7 days and 7 nights trying to give birth, I think, to her 5th child. And out of despair, she called upon the Virgin Mary, and she promised to convert if delivered from her agony. She gives birth to a baby boy, and he's black as coal. But the moment he's baptized, and that she's baptized as well, he goes from blackness to whiteness. And upon witnessing this miracle, her husband Abraham converts, her other children convert, and 80 Jewish onlookers, I don't know how they all fit into the room, in any case, they all converted as well. And so the bishop writes to his fellow bishop down south, saying these 90-some converts are going to come begging, giving them a license. Please ask the congregants, the parishioners over whom you have authority, to be generous with these neophytes so that they won't want to return to Judaism. So there are several ways one could search for Blanca. I mean, her name, given the color change of her infant, is an easy way to remember her name. But one could also search by place, because her story involves travel across a part of Europe. So one could search by Eln or by Barcelona, which are the 2 dioceses that the bishops who were involved in her case presided over. So if you search Eln, you come to Blanca in the year 1371. And one could search by language as well. Oh, but I think also it's interesting, I entered beggar as a profession. One could search, it's not, I don't know, it is an occupation, right? She has a license for it. The whole group does. They have a group license. They wore around their neck. Somebody did in the group. So if you search under beggar, which you get to by going to categories and then profession, you come up with Blanca again, and then you click on the details. So, and in the rubrics that are currently there, you can enter both profession before conversion and also profession after conversion. So either of those options would get you to the convert you're looking for. And right, here are some examples, just the first of 4 or more pages of examples of all the different professions that researchers have already entered into the database that you could search under.
So notice there's a cheesemaker and a kosher cheesemaker.
And I just wanted to show the image for Blanca.
I noticed there's no alphabetical order in these. These are just the order that they were entered.
Exactly. Now that's how it is, but when you will access it externally, it's
can you identify, for example, converts who became Cistercians or converts who became Jesuits?
I would imagine absolutely that one could specify the religious order that they joined. Yeah. So this is my entry for Blanca, and the only reason I'm dragging the whole thing up here is to show that here again I entered the original documents in PDFs, so people can read them with their own eyes, and it comes up, it's horizontal, but again you just drag it onto your desktop and you have the beautiful original. This one is on over 2 folios to interpret in the comfort of your home.
Does this mean a budget for permissions?
That's an interesting question.
Does it mean a budget for permissions? I mean, if you're reproducing some of these documents.
Yeah, that's you know yourself.
Yeah.
Key area. Again, we're thinking about how many of these texts could be actually put online and not, and we have to work in that a lot more.
If it's online access, of course.
If it's online, there's no problem.
These are not.
if
These
these
so
are-
far,
yeah.
the ones I've posted are, you have to go there in person to see them.
Yeah,
So they might come down.
And for example, this case would also be mass conversions?
Well, see, this is a question. I'm very skeptical that 80 Jews converted along with Blanca and her husband, but it says
an account of.
it's an account of, so I should actually probably, so do I put it under individual or mass? I guess I could put it under both.
No, I think I will put it under text, and let the text lead you to the question.
But what if you only know the name Blanca? How do you know to search by text?
Well, for example, hopefully in the search we would say mass, you'll be able to put in, I don't know, conversion of multiple, or mass conversion, and it'll come up as one of the examples.
I think most people will remember this story thinking of the mother, not of the...
But people don't know the story at all.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
But you should be able to find it both ways.
Exactly. It should be fairly easy, I mean, to enter it as a person and as a source also, so that you can approach the problem from whichever information you have at your disposal. So the duplicity isn't a problem, really.
You need to have multiple, you're interested in the baby, so you have to have the name, you have to have the mass, you have to have, okay, there was a miracle involved, and there was like institutional involvement because he sent this letter to the other bishop. You have to have all these options for me to look for, because I don't know the story at all, but I want to see miracles involved. That's what the search can do.
Yes, but once the free text is available for search, which it is not yet, but it will be shortly, then you will be able to search for any word that you've inputted into the database, regardless. But you can't produce a whole list of a cross-reference of babies who are also Spanish, who also converted from Catholicism to Judaism. But obviously, I mean, the search in the free text is a very useful tool in that respect.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm moderating from here. I don't know. I didn't think about it as moderating. Thank you very much. We'll literally take, because we're being more flexible, we'll take just 5 minutes for everyone to stretch their legs, and then we'll go on to the next example. And after the next example is lunch.
Food, we're just gonna play around a little more. So the good thing of this case is that you already know about it. You remember it extremely well because it was only 4 days ago. So we're gonna play around with it now. So I have a bunch of I have a PDF from all the files in the West Frisian archive in Hoorn, and that's the basis. All right. So, but we're gonna first of all, this is the first problem we have. So as you know, this is a trial against 3 people. Would you call this a mass conversion? 3 people converted? So I might suggest that the mass might be turned into just a group. Yeah, so a mass conversion is a very specific category, but you have to make a choice between a group and 3. So, but we decided to enter them as individuals for the time being, but you can also make them into a group.
Everybody's name, because for example in 1321 there's a mass conversion of Jews during the Shepherd's Crusade in northern Aragon, but it's about 20 Jews. I don't know if that counts as a mass conversion, but we know the names of all of those individuals. Is it possible when you enter a mass conversion to name everyone, or are they necessarily anonymous, the way the database is set up?
But then they'll be connected to the mass. We put in the mass conversion and the mass conversion. Okay, that's what.
We should enter. Maybe we should enter a subcategory between target and mass.
1391 was a mass conversion. You have to
when you have names you want to...
We do have technical issues here, just go on.
I think all of this, we have to keep in mind that the point of a database like this is to help other people delve into sources, find new sources. It's not going to provide them with the definitive information that they're going to write, about. They're just simply making connections about things they don't know about yet. So if they find one thing, they should have as many links as possible to possibly related things. The person will interpret it as valid or meaningful. All the categories, everyone can look at them and say, yeah, obviously, force, this, conversion, or whatever. But the point is not that this information is going to have to set it in stone as long as we make a million possible connections so that one thing could have suggestions for links, and that's up to the researcher to decide, yes, it's here or no, it's not. If we decide, then of course it cuts it off. If there's no connection between one type of source and another type of source, we don't think of all of those possible suggestions, and that means that researcher is not going to find a connection either. They're not going to think, unless they happen to stumble upon it. That's not how we want this to work. So I think we could brainstorm about, possible or potential or suggested categories that are not necessarily bound by facts we know, because that's up to the researcher to decide when they interpret the case. This isn't going to be the encyclopedia that grade school students study to learn history. This is for other researchers to then find other sources. So you should put a caveat, not for approved for children.
Now you can see something that we cannot on the computer. So we had a similar issue with the Horn case, so whether to introduce them as a mass conversions as a group, I would think would be a better category, or as individuals. So we introduce them as individuals, but of course these can be linked together. And I think ultimately this should also be introduced as a group. Okay, I put in the name of one of them, and of course many anonymous people have the similar name, so there's an issue with the search engine. Hold on. Sorry, I can't see anything here on the computer. So apparently all these people are the son of Joost. Okay, this is going to be a problem because it's going to take.
You can do it. Okay. You can
just search by individual.
Yeah. But these are unpublished items.
Yeah, they're
published.
They're published. Okay. Let me see. It's hard to kind of.
Yeah, I actually learned that unpublished. I'm gonna have to.
Okay.
Unpublished. You can't
We just
search.
got published, so that's good news. Joost. Voilà. Oh, that looks pretty. So here's already a first challenge and issue is the name. You're mostly working in the Middle Ages, but also in the 17th century you have different versions of names. You have an issue of, his name is Hans Joostens' zoon, Joostens. There can be different languages, so somebody like, for instance, like Jean and John. Usually you're transcribing, so sometimes people transcribe different things. you might have gotten it from translations with or without mistakes. So it would be very good to have one name and then as many different versions as you can find. So one of the people I found linked to a specific text his name was spelled in entirely different ways, but I'm almost sure it's the same person. And so that would be a very important thing with dealing with names, a variety of names and spellings. Motives was very interesting. We chose theological conviction, so that's also very interesting to go to make a long list of what kind of different motives you can have. I really like that there were some open entries that you can add details of what you think, because this is one of the challenges that I think we all have. We're working with a database, we don't like to be put into a corset, and here you can add specific details, because sometimes you feel like it doesn't really fit in any of these. Alright. So place of conversion also, and that was one of the questions, is he has a conversion narrative. He might be lying, he might be making up stuff, especially he's on trial. When somebody's on trial, if he's smart, so Jan Pieterszoon wanted to be martyred, so he was telling the truth. But Hans Josefsson, he wanted to be set free, so he might have made up things. So there's already different versions here where he was converted. Constantinople or Damascus. You could also argue, if you remember the case, that he met in Danzig an Englishman who convinced him of Judaism. Just the Englishman was not sure that he should be circumcised. So maybe he was, where was the site of his conversion? Was he already converted in Danzig, or was he converted later? Is circumcision the moment of conversion, or is the moment he was personally convinced that Judaism is the correct religion the place of conversion?
For example, Danzig here, is it in the text?
I could have put it in there, yeah.
You should.
I had to make choices, yeah.
Possibilities is better than, like, more possibilities.
Yeah, so that's why you should put Danzig, circumcision, everything you
want.
And a text to explain.
Yeah, it might be good to also have as many opportunities as possible to add explanations, notes. Also, we live in a democratic internet age, so on the one hand you need an editor who controls the database, but also give people the opportunity to add all kinds of notes, protests, other versions. This is clearly a made-up version, so this would be very important.
Yeah, for dates, in the relevant database we have a little box where you can explain a date, why it's before this date and after this date, or why we know it's precisely this date.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think it came up before serial conversions. There's a late 17th century case of Moses Germanus. You might have heard of him. Started out as a Catholic Lutheran Jew, and sometimes they go back and forth. So they converted many times. And also, what do you decide is the moment of conversion? Is a ritual the moment of conversion, or isn't it? Conversion from, I've noticed that we tend to think in the big monotheistic religion, so you convert to Christianity to Judaism, or Judaism to Islam, but I also saw that many people in the database already tried to be more specific. Christianity, which type of Christianity? Because I suggested that the Mennonites thought about conversion in a very different way. Actually, they didn't think they converted. They made an adult choice for the best option they had. So they might not even have argued, I have converted. I wasn't anything before, and I've chosen Judaism. So being as specifically as possible in the origin religion, and also where you're converting to. You might have remembered the two former Mennonites. They wanted to become as normal Jews as possible, so they went for the rabbinical tradition. And Jan Pieterszoon became the moment he became a Jew, he probably also became a very heretic Jew. He became some kind of Calvinist Karaite Jew. So what kind of category would you be using there? So it might be. So this is also an editor's choice. Do you force the person who enters the entry to make a choice of the big religions and then add to it different options? Because I think you also should have some kind of uniformity. family ties, of course, it's interesting, like in my Horn case, everybody's connected to each other, so he and his wife converted together. And I added some sources. This used to be the primary source, but since I found again the primary source, he actually is now demoted to a secondary source. Okay, this is also very interesting. Places. Again, this is a conversion discourse, and I added lots of question marks because there's different versions of where he went to. So the sheriff had a version, the ministers who talked to the prisoners had a different version, and the convert himself a different version. So what is the correct one? Yeah. So you need to add lots of question marks. So yeah, the more general question is the role of uncertainty in adding things to the database. Because on the one hand you should enter everything, on the other hand you should also add that this is really not sure, and that's a big challenge. And here we have the kosher cheese maker. That was me. Okay. Let's go to a second person. Okay, we're going to skip his wife, which is also very interesting. Historical documents, and probably Middle Ages, are not different. Women get a lesser role. So she's always the wife of. And when they speak about them, they speak about him. So how do you deal with this, with the division in gender priorities? Yeah, she's the second fiddle in the whole trial drama. He seems to be the main instigator, and she is the wife who is of course following him all over the world. And this might really not have been the case. Because I've seen other cases where actually female Mennonites converted to Judaism more than men. And I did a bit of a statistical attempt to make an overview of conversion to Judaism in the Dutch Republic, and more women actually converted than men. And most of them were unmarried, so this was not a case of marrying a rich Portuguese merchant. Okay. Let's see what comes out here. How many? We should have only 2.
Published and unpublished.
Oh, so he's still unpublished?
He might be still unpublished because, again, that's something that I discovered trying to publish these things, is that the numbers you gave me of the entries changes in the list of, I have to go back to the programmer.
So it's a very fluent database, yes.
No,
yeah.
too fluent.
Yeah. No, also I have an issue with finding my own people, so I couldn't find Hans, his first name, but I could find Joosten's zoon. So now we're going to look for another convert. So can we move to the unpublished version somehow?
Try capitalizing it and see if it shows up. It doesn't? Because I found that happens sometimes with me. But if I capitalize, I can find it, and if I didn't, I didn't find it. It seemed arbitrary, but that's what happened to me. I don't know, maybe it doesn't work here, but I had that happen.
And as you remember, this was the 3rd martyr, greedy convert of the Horn case. And the reason I pulled them up is because in the interrogation he is asked about somebody who is related to by marriage. So there's a certain other person asked about. His name is Jan Rijks. And I found a text which we can move to now. Can you maybe look it up? A text, Kesset Jonathan, which was written by a certain Jan Regin in the year 1600. And this must have been the same person. So the database, like I'm working like a database, I found the link myself, but what would be really interesting is you have these 2 different cases. So you have the documents from the West Frisian Archive in Hoorn mentioning a certain person, And then you have a text which is in Etz Chaim library, and you have a copy, microfilm copy in the Jewish National Library, which a text called Kesed Yonatan, which is written according to the introduction by a certain Jonathan Ger, who used to be called with the name Jan Regin, who lived in Hoorn in the year 1600. Yeah, so through the database you could suddenly see, hey, there's a link between the two. Maybe this person is the person who wrote this specific text. Then also you have problems, because the text Kesed Yonatan, there might be problems in the Portuguese here, because I only know Latin and French, and Portuguese is a different, so there might be some mistakes. So the question is here, first of all, is this the same person? So there's difference in spelling, which might really not be a problem, yeah? But is it the same person? The second question is this person the actual author? He might have become a famous convert, yeah? So the Jewish community was always warning of conversion to Christianity, like, we actually convinced some people the other way around, because this was a matter of pride, I know, in the Jewish community, if a Christian converted to Judaism. Yeah? So was he truly the author, or has he become some kind of mythical convert, and we write a polemic in his name, but he didn't actually write it? Yeah, so how do you deal with this? Now you suddenly have a text with entirely different dynamics, whereas I started with actual people I found on trial, so it's really hard to argue that these people are fictive persons. Yeah, so how do you connect the two? Yeah? I think these are the same, but you don't know.
Sorry, it's not a yet edited entry. Not yet. No.
It's not published.
Okay.
This one is just published.
No,
not yet, unfortunately. See if there's something else important. Let's move to another case.
Secondary literature, better to add pages too. Secondary literature, it's better to add pages, not just the book.
We did this fast, yes. It can be very precise and say, okay, so this is Kesed Yonatan. So I want you to take a quick look of this, because I was really struggling how to enter this specific text. So this is an excerpt from the minutes of the Mennonite community of Amsterdam a year after this conversion trial. What to do with this? Who converted to what? According to whom? Oh, you can read it?
No, too far.
Oh, so far, sorry. Yeah, but I can try to put it full screen, but then we might screw up things. I will read it to you, because we did put it full screen and then everything went wrong because it becomes very dominant. To the brethren are presented the wife of Harman Schoenlapper. Also interesting here, the wife of. She's not a person, she's the wife of. So try to find a person there. She's secondary to her husband. So to the brethren are presented the wife of Harman Schoenlapper, which is shoemaker, and the wife of Hans the sockmaker, who are rumored of Judaism, and who, having been admonished and instructed many times, remained unconvertible, so unconvertible back. And even recently, by Nitter Obbes and Matthäus Jansen, having been admonished in the name of the council and summoned in front of the community to show they do not deny Christ, but they did not confess, upon which we said we took that for denial of Christ. And they answered not to be willing to come, nor to say the one or the other, but that they wanted to remain neutral between the two, that is, between the Jews and the Christians. They also argued that we didn't need to bother them anymore because they had left us already a long time ago. We decided to regard them as separated off, as excommunicated. So, first of all, where did they convert? Is a question here. Did they convert? What are the two? So they're accused of having become Jewish.
So I would like to put that in the category of text. Put in the text and give a phrasing what's what's in the text, and then whoever's looking for it wants to do research or something like that, find it.
So the text would become the primary, but still then you have to argue conversion from what to what. So the accusation is they have become Rupert of Judaism, so they have become Jewish. And they actually argue, and this would be a very interesting rubric as well, which you can see in Middle Age probably far less, but in the Dutch Republic you have it, that they have clear tendency towards Judaism, but they do not want to commit. And they remain somewhere in between. So what do you call this? Yes?
If I understood correctly, the database should be a starting point for research, right?
I didn't hear you.
The database should be a starting point for research, if I understood correctly.
Yes.
So basically, certain questions are bound to remain, say, for the time being. You could always have clearly on the page, and then...
Yeah, but how will someone finding, I mean, someone working on Netherlands in the 17th century, if it's only under text, how will we find that some converted or accusation of being Jewish or converting to Judaism? It should appear somewhere under a certain category, because otherwise, if you don't know the text, you won't know it after you search the database.
This is linked to Netherlands 17th century. And if you do a search Netherlands 17th century, it will come up as one of the possible...
Yeah, but you need to know that this is someone accused of being Jewish, because otherwise you will have to look Netherlands 17th century, you might find 500 cases, 1,000 cases, that would be too much.
Or maybe, I don't know, the editor might be allowed to maybe very short remarks, like in scales, and the editor knows as a suggestion for the research that this might not actually be conversion.
We're going to have a lot of cases in which the conversion is dubious. So we're going to be able to say this is conversion, an accusation of a conversion from Mennonite Christianity to Judaism. And then that's where the explanatory text is obviously key.
I think we can think of two planes at once. I think of opening up the possibilities of what the nets by which people are going to find possible data. So they say, I'm interested in, dubious conversions to Judaism. Okay, so that's all they want to do, and they don't know where to go from there. They should be able to find that, and then if they get to it, they say, that's not what I want. You can explain all of the nuances and really on another level where you really present the problem of the case. But no one will find that unless they know it's there. So you have to have categories that are not necessarily right. That is, there's suggestions, there are possibilities, they might be right, that there's a lot of research that you have to show they're right, but that when someone does a kind of casts a very wide net, they'll scoop up things and then decide what's right. And we shouldn't feel bound by those suggestions that we're somehow distorting the data. As long as we present that kind of search as very broad, so that we should think of more tags and more categories, not less. Make fewer decisions that eliminate possibilities. And every time a possibility occurs to us, include it in the search tag so that someone else might be able to verify or not, rather than pushing them down, saying, no, that doesn't fit, so then they'll never find it.
I think you have at least two choices when you create a database like this. One is to figure out what questions you might ask, right? And then that'll motivate the types of categories and also the types of data. But the other is to put the data out there and then let those tags and details come from the data themselves, right? Like in the Princeton Geniza project, we have a genre of document called legal document, but as you collect documents, like you realize that breaks down more finely, and so, over time we had to create other little genres or to include multiple genres in the metadata for a single item. And so I think, like you're saying something similar, like one is, again, what are we talking? We're talking about conversion. Well, it's dubious conversion, right? Before we even set up the database, it's dubious conversion, one category. Or as you gather that data, you realize, oh, this is something we need to now accommodate in the database. The problem with the latter is, of course, you have to revisit everything else that you already have in the database and say, well, does this fit into the category of dubious conversion or not?
Why not just leave it open and say, it might not. And that's for someone else to decide, so that they don't go to that database looking for the information, like the final answer on that conversion. They go to look for possibilities that they then have to interpret.
Right, when you set up a database, there's certain types of research questions, I think, that you want to facilitate it answering, right? And so if we're kind of deciding, I think that the papers kind of point out some of those basic questions that we might want to address. And then over time, you're right, the data will allow us to respond to more questions. But I do think you need to suggest some things, like the whole concept of conversion, right? We imagine this document is about conversion, therefore it's going to go in the database at all.
Or we could think of possible two categories of tags. That is, tags that we as editors think are more certain, factual tags, or tags with confidence, and then suggestions. What people could, if they don't find what they're looking for in the things we're sort of stamping as we think this is true, they could go look in these suggested tags and find other connections that are really maybe very dubious or not true at all, but that are somehow connected with the entries.
One way the current structure addresses that is by having drop-down boxes for stuff that we think is more definite. Right? These are categories we've created, and then more narrative stuff for stuff that the user wants to introduce. But over time, you might incorporate some of that stuff from the narrative open text into the drop-downs as well.
Yeah, the trick is to make sure it's searchable.
And also, the drop-downs shouldn't always be either or. Like, it can be both and, mass and individual. It can be forced and voluntary. So that it'll show up when it's not clear. You don't have to choose between them. I was going to add, when I raised my hand before, just that it would be great if we could search for references to converts or conversion in canon law and rabbinic response. I don't know who's going to enter this data, but if we're doing it by texts, then that would be fantastic, not just to have individuals.
You are. Everyone here, that's basically the idea, right? Everyone here eventually will be doing
Okay, so I'm going to continue this exact conversation. If there's something else, then go on.
From that dubious matter. It's just that I don't know how many of us have come across these situations, but where it's not quite clear whether the person who is depicted as converting from one religion to another is in fact sustaining his former religion while switching to a new religion. And that came up in your panel, and perhaps we can consider a category where the affiliation is not that concrete. So conversion, but sort of like there's also this issue that came up in another context of people of hypocrisy, of people sustaining an outward religion and another crypto Jews. Maimonides is references in Taqiyya in Islam and so forth. So
Paula brought backsliding, which is a slightly different but related issue.
But then you get big problems of categorization. What is normative conversion? I'm thinking of Shabtaism, Shabtaut. So it's hypocritical, but it also has a redemptive function. So it becomes really risky. I think you end up arguing.
I think what's running through all these cases is the fact that people are keeping their feet in two different areas, and so this could be a category of people that have not switched from one category to another in so definite terms, or at least we're not sure of them.
I think that another very important category to add is texts that are mentioned in the conversion story, because if someone is interested, let's say, in the use of verses, certain verses in conversion stories, or text, let's say someone...
Maybe we'll see examples of this, of all these issues, because what I was planning to present, which probably I won't be able to do all of that, but I'm more interested in the theological implications of conversion and its representations, etc. So obviously the kind of materials that I've been working with do not relate so much to archival documents pertaining to certain events of conversions, but to rather broader scope of texts and genres. We've seen here several examples with regarding to legal documents that surely should be inserted. And as I was trying to think how to put some of these texts, these relevance texts in, it became clear that the major thing that we should do is to think about these methods of categories and fields that would be defined. לא שומעים? Categories that would be able to define the text in such a way that it would be both efficient for people who uses the database to search the text in the first place, but also after they reach to a certain text, that the database will be able to create these links, relevant links between different texts who deals with the same issues. So this cannot, I think, be left in an open text, because we need very particular and standard wordings, so people will be able to search. So what we'll have to do is that as many texts will be entered, we'll see the kind of relevant things, and eventually a moderator will have to build a bank of certain topics. Because obviously a text should be defined, first of all, by the date, the place it was written, the author, other converts that are mentioned, specifically names of converts that are mentioned, that would be able to link to other relevant texts. But we will have to build, I guess, in order for this to be an efficient tool, a category of topics. So what I've been doing, and right now in this state of the database is I simply entered an abstract entry that kind of generally described what the text is about, and I'll try to think with you what is the relevant category that we should put, so people will be actually able to look for things. So I'll start with the Scrutinum Scripturarum. That's a treaty written by Shlomo Halevi or Paulo de Santa Maria, Paul of Burgos, a very famous convert, a famous rabbi who turned into a bishop, a clergyman, a theologian, an important administrator in the royal courts. I didn't try at all to put him as an individual entry. It's one of these cases that you should simply go to the book. So you can give. I mean, there's so many versions. There's so many historiographical traditions. Yanai mentioned in Monday the Alonso de Palencia and his references to the Santa Maria. So this is one of these cases that the database, I don't think, is the proper place to start and overload all the possible references. However, with regard to his other works, I've tried to insert one. So I'll just read what's written on the abstract. The Scrutinum is a twofold polemical dialogue. The first book contains a colloquy between Saul the Jew and Paul the Christian concerning 10 articles of the Christian faith. By the end of the first book, Saul is persuaded and declares he accepts Christianity. Accordingly, the second book presents a conversation between a magister and his recently converted disciple, in which further matters that could not be understood without the faith in Christ are discussed. So, thus, conversion is thus presented as a continuous process that goes beyond the initial acceptance of Christianity as the true religion. So, here, beside the initial fact that this is a text that was written by a convert, which probably should privilege it to be in the database in the first place, we have here several other elements or motives that I think should be put into a topic tab. For the first part that I was reading, I think first of all the most significant thing is that we have here a literary person of conversion of a convert. So we have here a dialogue in which we have a convert that speaks directly. So I guess we will have to, one topic that would have to be, that is important to have is literary representations of conversion, of converts. Now, of course, there is wide variety of such possible representations, but if you cross a search with polemic, for example, so you can have an interesting kind of cluster of results in which converts are actually given a voice in this literary genre. I continue to read. All right, so this was the general description, but now there are several places or cases in the text itself that pertain to more specific issues of converts and conversion. So in 2.6.10, Pablo provides his own account of the violent rites of 1391 and the mass conversion that followed them. The conversions are described as the outcome of a divine intervention which leads the Jews to a true change of heart. So here we have what we maybe best categorized as a topic that the historical account of conversion. So within the text we have an historical account of conversion. So if someone is looking for depictions of acts of conversions, he should be able to have a link that would put him in this text. I mean, one of many, of course, descriptions. Maybe in the case of 1391, it could have its own special category. I mean, one of the topics would be descriptions of 1399. I don't know. But anyway, it's there, it's in the text, and it's something that people may find useful in their search. And then I continue to read. On two occasions, 1.2.4 and 2.6.13-14, the scrutinium explicitly addresses the question of the spiritual position of converts within the church. In both cases, it is suggested that some old Christians perceive Jewish converts as inferior due to their Jewish origins. Pablo rejects this notion and claims, mostly on the basis of Romans 11, that Jewish converts were promised to fulfill a vital role in all three historical stages of the church, in the time of its formation, throughout its existence, and at the end of times. He counts four examples of celebrated converts who prove that it is needed, that this is indeed the case. I don't see here. Well, he begins with Pope Evaristus of the 2nd century, then Julian Pomerius of Toledo of the 7th century, Petrus Alfonsi, and then Abner of Burgos. So there are, I guess, several topics in this last section that deserve to be differentiated and to serve as a category that one can search within. First of all, we have here a discussion about the spiritual status of converts as Christians. So this is a theological discussion that I guess many of us would find interesting, and would love to have a tool that would be able to locate for them text who deals with these questions. What is the position of the converts within Christianity? Of course, it's a two-sided coin. I don't know if we need two topics, but Pablo also represents here in the dialogue the counter-argument. That is, the argument who says converts are somehow inferior within the church. So maybe this is another category that we need to have in order to identify a text that presents the argument against the pureness of converts as Christians. And finally, of course, we have the name of other converts, of other celebrated converts, that should have should allow us. That should allow us, once there will be entries, either to the actual individual entries of these converts, but what I think would be much more interesting and much more probable, to other literary references to these converts, than to go to other texts that mention them. So maybe you can start finding out things about these tropes, these motifs, as they reoccur in different in more and more texts. So right now in the scoring form, I guess that there is very little use for researchers, unless you know what you're looking for a certain text and you want to have some kind of a general idea about its content. Later I provided the table of contents of the work. But if we will have this additional field of topics, then you will get to this text through several trajectories of interest that may bring you to elements and to motifs that appear here. Should I continue to another example, or somebody want? All right. The next example, I will skip several examples and go to another. To another example that brings together many of the themes that we were talking about during this conference, and I think many of the talks that were given intersect with the topics that are presented in it. And I'm referring to the Fortaletium Fidei by Alonso de Aspina, a contemporary of Alonso de Palencia, confessor of Enrique IV, a preacher, a scholar, but a man who has been known for his to foreshadow the kind of anti-converso and anti-Jewish positions that would later be would dominate the peninsula towards the later part of the 15th century. Tried to initiate an inquisition already in the early 60s, and most of what we know about his opinions comes from this massive work, the Fortaletium Fidei, which he composed as kind of a guide in order to combat the enemies of the church. He mentions four. It is divided into 5 books, but it addresses 4 enemies: the heretics, the Jews, the Saracens, and the devil. Just looking for it so I can read it myself. So again, I'll start reading the abstract that I've entered, and we'll stop at the many places that there are different elements that require a special rubric of topic, I guess. The treaty contains 5 books dealing with the 4 enemies of the church: heretics, Jews, Saracens, and demons. The second book concerns heretics, presenting 12 considerations. The 6 considerations portray 14 kinds of heresies, the first one being that of Jewish converts. Spina introduces a variety of perverse belief and heretical customs that are typical of Jewish converts. So here we obviously should have some kind of a category that refers to descriptions of converts' behaviors or converts' religious practices. So someone who looks for these kind of textual representations will get to this text. Now, I won't get into the specific behavior that he described because we don't have the time, but they are very interesting. The third book addresses the Jews and contains 12 considerations that present their perfidy and corrupted nature, illustrate the danger they pose to Christian, and outline how to combat them. All right, so here I should add, Spina is moving. Well, one of the things that should be mentioned, Spina is moving between genres. This huge tractate, it compiles very different kind of genres. So this is an example of a text that would be identified in the rubric of genres by multiple references. The 7th consideration in this third book about the Jews is dedicated for exposing the cruelties of the Jews. It presents 17 atrocities from different times and eras committed by Jews against Christians, including well poisoning, collaborating with the enemies of Christianity, the murder of Christian patients by their Jewish physicians, and the killing of Christian children for ritual purposes. The 8th and 9th cruelties are stories of a ritual murder that Spina heard from a Jew, Emmanuel of Genoa, who was seeking baptism. In these sections, Spina also recounts the conversion of Emmanuel. So here the Fortaletium Fidei serves as a purely historical source for a person, that he gives the name, he gives the place, he gives. I have it in an individual entry. I won't go over there now, but you can extract from the text much information about the actual event, at least as Spina describes it. And we should have this kind of function that you can, by a click, or in the list of topics, would be also the specific persons that are described in this text, and you can go straight to the individual. Because if you start putting all the information right here on the text, it would be something that would be very difficult to work with to someone who is not interested in that particular very specific details that you can draw from the text. Okay, so let's continue with the text. The 10th considerations present 9 to 11, depending on the edition, stories of miracles in which the Jewish malice was suppressed. Several of them end with either mass or individual conversions. The first miracle describes the failed attempt to convert an insincere Jew named Barba in 1419. He's brought to the baptismal font, and every time that the priest tries to baptize him, the water evaporates, and this is how everyone can see that he's trying to convert without a pure heart. So now, what's that? The second or third miracle, depending on the edition, ends with the conversion of the Jews of Crete in 1452. The story is that the devil appears in the form of Moses. He tells the Jews that they can walk back home to the promised land by foot. He, of course, goes to the ocean to go through the sea, and then they see him, they believe him, they go after him. Thousands of them drown, and the remaining survivors convert. So this is another tale. All right. The fifth or the sixth miracle ends with the conversion of the Jews of Beirut in 701. This is a story about a Jew who moves to live in a house to reside in a house that was once owned by a Christian who left the crucifix in. They see the Jew's friends come to visit him in his house. They naturally decide they want to torture the crucifix. They do so. It bleeds. They take the blood to the synagogue. Then they reveal that the blood has the remarkable qualities of healing qualities. And then they all convert. All the Jews of Beirut convert, and they convert also the synagogue to the church. Am I out of time? I mean, that's what it means.
Oh, more or less.
Okay, so I'll try to bring it to a close. But because what I wanted to stress is, of course, these lines of stories and others, Espina doesn't make them up. He takes them from older chronicles. So we have a variety of sources that refer to these very same cases of conversions, but with very interesting, even if sometimes minor differences. For example, the story of the Jew that is trying to be baptized, but the water evaporates, is originated in earlier chronicles. When the reason that the water evaporates is because the priest is an Arian, and he gives the wrong, he says of course the wrong words of baptism. So God won't let the Jew turn into an Arian, and then he understands that he goes to he converts to Catholicism. Or another of the example here about the miracle of Mary in Segovia in the 13th century, in the Marisaltos, that Alonso de Espina changes the version. The woman that is being accused and convicted in adultery in Espina's version is convicted to death by her own husband, who decides to throw her from a cliff. But in early versions, this is in a Christian court. So they are very interesting. But very interesting differences. But ideally, what we will have is that we will have topics. Each of these cases would lead, that if you push them, it would lead to a different entry of the story itself. Now, the story itself would have in it the very different, in the primary sources that relates to it, would have the very different sources. So one could have this circle of texts and links that he can walk through them. And as many people would insert more text and relate them to these, so that they could speak in the same language, we could have potentially a very powerful tool in recognizing developments of stories, of representations, of cases, etc.
Okay, thank you, Alexander and we will now take a well-deserved lunch break. We will begin again at